And now we arrive at the threshold the ancient record has been preparing us for. The fathers have warned, the boundaries have been repeated. The remnant has been taught to remain near the holy place, to guard worship, to keep restraint, to live in concealment so the heart stays clear. And then comes Jared. The book does not present Jared as a villain, nor as careless. It presents him as a hinged generation, a man standing at the edge of two pressures, the inheritance of restraint from his fathers, and a growing pull from below that has not yet erupted but has begun to press harder. And here's a deep layer that matters. The descent does not begin because the remnant suddenly hates God. It begins because curiosity grows where discipline weakens. The people have lived long. They have known peace. They have known ordered worship. And slowly the question arises, not spoken at first, but felt. What is down there? This is always how the strategy works. The enemy does not begin by saying, abandon God. He begins by saying, you can look and still return. So the book introduces what it calls a company, not one man acting alone, not a sudden rebellion, but a group that begins to reason together. This is crucial. Corporate reasoning dulls discernment faster than private temptation. When many people agree, hesitation feels unnecessary. When many desire the same thing, restraint feels extreme. And when many say, we can go and still come back, the boundary begins to feel negotiable. So the company speaks among themselves. They do not speak of evil. They speak of experience. They do not speak of rebellion. They speak of exploration. And this is why the book treats this moment with such gravity. Because descent framed as exploration is more dangerous than descent framed as sin. And Jared knows it. So Jared stands and adjures them. The book uses strong language here, not because Jared is angry, but because he understands the stakes. He warns them with the accumulated wisdom of the fathers. He reminds them of Abel's blood. He reminds them of Cain's wandering. He reminds them of the oath sworn in the cave of treasures. He reminds them that some boundaries were not given to restrict joy, but to preserve life. He tells them plainly, if you go down, the return will not be simple. If you cross this threshold, the heart will change. If you loosen restraint, discernment will weaken. This is not fear-mongering. It is spiritual realism. And then the book does something very honest. Some listen, and some do not. This is another layer believers need to hear. Warnings do not fail because they are unclear. They fail because desire is already leaning. The company convinces itself that the warning is excessive. They reason that the fathers were cautious because of trauma. They say, we are stronger now. We are wiser now. We will not fall as they did. This is the language of every generation that believes it is exempt from old cautions. And then comes the descent. Not all at once. Not violently, but deliberately. The book portrays it as a choice, not an accident. A choice made together, with agreement, with confidence that they can manage the consequences. And here's the line that must be spoken carefully and clearly. Some thresholds, once crossed, alter the heart in ways that are not easily reversed. This does not mean God abandons them. It means formation cannot be rushed backward. When restraint is traded for permission, the inner compass shifts. What once felt heavy begins to feel normal. What once felt dangerous begins to feel acceptable. And what once felt unthinkable begins to feel justified. And the book wants us to understand this is why concealment matters. The veiled life trains the heart to wait. The guarded altar trains the heart to reverence. The repeated adjuration trains the heart to resist group pressure. Without those, dissent feels harmless. And now the narrative prepares us for Enoch. Because Enoch is not introduced as a man of spectacle first, but as a man of discernment. He sees what is happening. He understands the cost. He knows that God's patience is vast, but not careless. He knows that the Father warns before judgment, but does not force obedience. So Enoch will speak, not to condemn, but to call back, not to flatter, but to warn. And this is where the next study will slow down again, because the Father's voice at the threshold deserves to be heard carefully. For now, let this layer rest. Abel did not go down. His righteousness became a witness. Seth's line stayed near the holy place to preserve that witness. Jared warned when the pull to descend became collective. A company chose descent, believing return would be easy. And heaven allowed the choice because forced obedience does not produce maturity. This is not a story about ancient people only. It is a living pattern. Every generation faces moments when curiosity presses against restraint. Every community faces moments where agreement dulls discernment. Every believer faces moments where the invitation sounds reasonable and the warning sounds old. And the Father, then and now, does the same thing. He warns. He waits. He allows choice. And he continues working toward restoration, even when dissent has consequences. And now the story draws closer to the voice the Father raises at the threshold Enoch. The book does not introduce Enoch as a man chasing attention. It introduces him as a man whose inner life has become clear enough to recognize danger before the danger looks like danger. In a generation where many are beginning to reason together, beginning to say, we can go down and still return, Enoch is formed by a different spirit. He is formed by restraint. He is formed by patience. He is formed by reverence. He is formed in concealment. So when the company begins to lean toward dissent, Enoch does not treat it as a small curiosity. He treats it as a door. Because once a door is opened, the same strategy does not stop at the first step. The first step is only permission, and permission becomes a pathway. So Enoch speaks, not as a man performing prophecy, but as a son guarding his father's house. He warns them the way a watchman warns, not because he hates the people, but because he can see what they cannot yet see. He can see that the heart is already shifting. He can see that the boundary is being reframed as optional. He can see that corporate agreement is dulling discernment. And this is one of the deepest layers here. When a group agrees to descend, the individual conscience begins to quiet. The person says, if so many are going, it must be fine. That is how the door widens, not by one bold rebellion, but by many small consents. So Enoch warns them not to trust the comfort of group agreement. He warns them not to treat the mountain as a prison. He warns them not to despise the veiled life that kept their hearts clear. He warns them that the down direction is not neutral. Because below is not simply another place. Below is a pattern. Below is a stream of life that has been shaped by Cain's line, shaped by appetite without restraint, shaped by rivalry, shaped by the normalizing of disorder. So Enoch's warning is not merely don't travel. His warning is don't mingle with a pattern that will reshape you. And the book emphasizes that this is not theoretical. The fathers have been repeating the warning because they know what happens when boundaries are treated lightly. The heart becomes divided, and a divided heart is easy to lead. Enoch pleads with them to remain near the altar, near the consecrated place, near the covering of worship. Because worship is not only singing, it is alignment. It is how a household keeps its center. And now Scripture's tone aligns perfectly with what the tradition stream is doing, and we can let Scripture speak softly inside the narrative the way you prefer. It says Enoch walked with God. It does not say he performed. It does not say he argued endlessly. It says he walked. A steady life, a quiet obedience, a heart kept near. That is the kind of man who can recognize the threshold. So Enoch's warning becomes a test, not only for the company, but for the listeners. Because the real question is, what do you do when God's warning stands in front of your desire? Some receive a warning and become sober. Others receive a warning and become offended. And the book shows that the company does what many do when they are already leaning. They treat the warning as excessive. They think Enoch is too strict. They think the fathers were too cautious. They think they can manage what the fathers feared. This is the voice of premature confidence. It is not the voice of maturity. Because maturity does not boast, I can handle it. Maturity trembles and says, if the Father warns, I will listen. So Enoch does what a true prophetic voice does. He does not force them, and he does not flatter them. He sets the boundary in truth and leaves the choice to them. And here is another deep layer. Heaven does not produce a holy people by coercion. Heaven produces a holy people by covenant, by hearts that willingly submit to wisdom. So the company chooses. And the book's grief is that many choose dissent. Not because they think they are choosing evil, but because they think they are choosing experience. Yet the book teaches that some experiences are not neutral. Some experiences imprint the soul. Some experiences reshape desire. Some experiences veil discernment. This is why Enoch's warning is so weighty. He is trying to keep them from an imprint they are not prepared to carry. Because once the heart has tasted a pattern long enough, the pattern begins to feel normal. And then, even if the person tries to return, the return is not simple. Not because the Father refuses mercy, but because the person's inner appetite has been trained in a different direction. This is why the book says some steps make it hard to return. It is not a limit on God. It is a truth about formation. Formation cannot be reversed instantly. So Enoch stands at the threshold, warning with a grief that sounds like love, because it is love. He knows the Father is forming a remnant. He knows the Father is preserving a line for unveiling. He knows the Father is building a people whose hearts can carry what heaven guards. And then the company goes down, and Enoch remains. He remains near God. He remains near the altar. He remains within the veiled life, not because he is afraid of the world, but because he is guarding the vessel of the heart. And the book quietly shows a consequence that is both sobering and instructive. The ones who descend begin to lose the ease of returning. The ones who remain begin to grow in clarity, because the heart becomes like what it loves. If it loves reverence, it grows reverent. If it loves appetite, it grows hungry for more appetite. So Enoch's warning becomes the dividing line. Not between good people and bad people, but between two postures. Those who keep restraint because they trust the Father's wisdom, and those who loosen restraint because they trust their own confidence. And in our day, this is the same threshold. The same strategy still wears different clothing. The invitation still comes in stages. First sound persuasion, reasoning, this isn't a big deal. Then cite something looks good, looks harmless, looks spiritual. The invitation, just step down, just try, just join, you can come back anytime. But the Father still sends Enoch voices, people, teaching, scriptures, quiet inner checks to warn at the threshold. And the question remains the same. Will we treat the warning as mercy? Or will we treat the warning as too strict and descend? So we end this portion with Enoch standing as a witness of the Father's tone, a man formed in concealment, a man guarding the boundary, a man speaking at the door, a man choosing to walk with God rather than be swept by corporate desire. And next we will follow what the book describes as the unfolding consequence of the company's descent, how a corporate choice becomes a corporate drift, and why the remnant must be preserved for what comes afterward. And then the descent begins to show its real nature. At first, it looks like a simple movement of bodies, people going down a mountain, crossing a boundary, entering a different way of life. But the book is not trying to teach geography. It is teaching spiritual direction, because what changes is not only where they walk, but what starts to shape their appetite. Those who go down begin to breathe a different atmosphere. They begin to hear a different speech. They begin to normalize what the remnant once refused. And this is why Enoch's warning was not dramatic. It was surgical. He was trying to prevent an imprint. Because the first consequence of descent is subtle. The conscience becomes quieter. Not silent all at once, just quieter. The inner check that once felt strong begins to feel too strict. The boundary that once felt holy now feels unnecessary. The veiled life that once felt like protection begins to feel like missing out. And when that shift happens, the heart becomes easier to invite further. So the enemy's strategy continues the way it always does. First sound, conversation, reasoning, persuasion. They begin to hear voices that interpret the Father's warnings as fear. They begin to hear speech that treats restraint as weakness. They begin to hear counsel that calls consecration isolation. And then sight, the eyes begin to feast. They see beauty without boundaries. They see ease without discipline. They see a life that appears free. And the book wants the listener to understand not everything that looks free is free. Sometimes it is simply unrestrained. An unrestrained desire does not remain gentle for long. Then invitation, the step, becomes relational. Not just observing, but mingling. Not just visiting, but joining. Not just seeing, but entering into bonds that reshape loyalty. And this is where the descent becomes costly. Because the moment the remnant begins to form deep bonds with a different pattern, the heart starts to divide. And a divided heart is unstable. A divided heart tries to keep two loyalties. A divided heart tries to keep worship while also keeping appetite. A divided heart tries to keep the Father's counsel while also keeping the world's approval. But a house cannot be built on two foundations. So the book shows what the fathers feared. The descent becomes adrift. Not because everyone instantly turns violent, but because the standard begins to fall. What was once unthinkable becomes discussable. What was once forbidden becomes negotiable. What was once resisted becomes excused. And then something else happens. Those who went down begin to speak back up. They return with stories. They return with laughter. They return with a persuasive speech. They say, "It is fine, nothing happened, we are still ourselves, you are too cautious." And this becomes another pressure on the remnant, because the most dangerous invitation is not the one from strangers, but the one from familiar voices. This is how corporate drift spreads. One person goes down, then several. Then they become a chorus, and the chorus begins to call restraint extreme. So the remnant is tested again, not by fear, by social pressure. And this is where the Father's formation is revealed as mercy, because the Father did not teach the remnant restraint merely to keep them separate. He taught them restraint so they could endure persuasion without yielding. He taught them devotion so they could remain steady when everyone else called devotion outdated. And Enoch stands in this moment like a pillar. He does not chase the company to fight them. He does not compete for attention. He remains aligned with the Father's tone, and he keeps speaking at the threshold. And in this section, Enoch's work becomes intercession as much as warning. He carries grief in his spirit because he can see the future of descent if it continues. The weakening of household order, the blurring of boundaries, the loss of reverence, the corruption of what should remain consecrated. So he pleads, he urges, he calls the remnant to remain near the altar, to keep prayer central, to guard what the Fathers built. And the book wants us to feel something here. Heaven's warnings are never cold. They are in love. The Father warns because he desires to preserve. The Father warns because he knows what desire becomes if it is not governed. And now the consequence deepens. Because the longer the company stays below, the harder it becomes to return to the same simplicity they once had. Even when they come back up physically, something in them has changed. Their speech has changed. Their patience has changed. Their reverence has thinned. Their appetite has widened. This is why the book teaches that some unveilings require preparation. If the heart is not prepared, what is seen does not heal it. It inflames it. What is tasted does not satisfy it. It expands craving. And then the person calls craving freedom, but it is not freedom. So when the company says, we can return whenever we want, the book answers with quiet severity, you can return in body quickly, but the heart does not always return quickly. Not because the Father refuses mercy, because the heart has been trained by what it chose. And this is the sobering lesson. Training is real. What you look at repeatedly trains you. What you allow repeatedly trains you. What you justify repeatedly trains you. So the Fathers warned, knowing that training shapes destiny. And now Enoch's warning becomes even more weighty when Scripture's own line is remembered with tenderness. It says Enoch walked with God, and it says he was not, for God took him. The Scripture does not offer a long explanation, but it does give clear honor. Enoch is remembered as a man whose life remained aligned with the Father, even as many were drifting. And that becomes a sign for us today. Because many people want to be recognized as special, but the Father's recognition is often quiet and deeply different from human applause. The Father honors the one who walks steadily, patiently, faithfully, especially when the crowd is drifting. So Enoch stands as a witness. The veiled life is not wasted. The concealed season is not meaningless. It is where the Father forms a heart that can carry light without pride. And now we draw the thread home without harshness. The descent pattern is still present. First sound, persuasive reasoning that makes boundaries look unnecessary. Then sight, what appears attractive and exciting and safe. Then the invitation, join us, loosen a little. You can still be faithful, you can still return any time. And many believers today fall into the same drift, not always into obvious rebellion, but into diluted devotion. They start praying less. They start testing less. They start listening to the Father's tone less. They begin to treat restraint as optional. And then, without noticing, their inner world changes. This is why your emphasis on discernment, patience, and restored household order is so important. The Father is not trying to keep his children from joy. He is trying to keep them from becoming unsafe vessels for unveiling. When people seek revelation without formation, they often end up confused. When people want authority without humility, they often end up with pride. When people seek identity without results, they often end up in self-deception. So the Father's way remains the same. He forms first. He steadies first. He teaches restraint first. He restores the household first. Then, when it is safe, he unveils what is veiled. And now, the story is positioned for what comes next. The widening consequences of dissent in the generations, and the Father's preservation of a remnant line, even as the earth becomes more mixed, more noisy, more unstable. So we end this continuation with Enoch's witness standing clear, a warning spoken at the door, a call to remain near the altar, a refusal to trade consecration for curiosity, a life that walked with God when many were choosing drift. And next, we will follow what the book implies through this descent thread, how a corporate choice becomes a corporate condition, and why the Father's patience eventually meets a boundary of judgment while still preserving those who remained aligned with him. And now let us slow down and let Enoch's warning be heard the way the ancient stream intends it to be heard, not like a footnote, but like a voice standing at the door. The company had already begun to reason together. They had already begun to soften the boundary in their speech. They had already begun to call restraint too strict, and to call dissent harmless. And that is why Enoch steps forward with grief in his spirit, because he can feel the shift before the crowd can name it. And Enoch speaks as if he is not only talking to them, but speaking for the Father's order. Brothers, he says, do not call this small. You are not only choosing a direction with your feet, you are choosing a direction with your appetite. An appetite is a teacher. It trains the heart. He looks at them like someone looking at family about to touch fire. You say you will go down and return unchanged. But hear me, the heart does not always return the way the body returns. You can climb back up quickly, but your inner world will have tasted something that will ask for more. And when it asks for more, you will call the craving freedom, and you will forget what freedom actually is. And the company answers him with the confidence of the untested. They say, we have devotion, we have prayers, we have the teachings of our fathers. We will not fall. We are not Cain's line. We are strong. But Enoch does not accept that confidence as proof. He answers like a watchman. Strength is not proved by words. It is proved by restraint. If you are strong, then remain. If you are strong, then obey what the fathers adjured. If you are strong, then guard the altar instead of testing the boundary. And then he presses the deepest point. This is how dissent begins, not by hatred of God, but by lowering the boundary until the heart no longer recognizes danger. He warns them about the stages that always come. First comes sound. Someone speaks persuasively, making the Father's caution sound like fear. Then comes sight. You begin to look, and what you see stirs appetite. Then comes the invitation, not only to look, but to join. And once joining happens, the line is no longer clear. And now, as we breathe Scripture into the narrative gently, we can let it speak in the same tone. It says we must test the spirits. It says the adversary moves like a lion, seeking whom he may devour. And it says the heart must rule what crouches at the door. Enoch is doing exactly that. He is trying to keep them from opening the door in the first place. Then Enoch speaks again, more tender now, not less serious. Do you know why the Father placed you here? Not to punish you, to preserve you. This mountain is not a prison, it is protection. The veiled life is not boredom, it is clarity. The altar is not routine, it is alignment. And here is the line that pierces. If you despise the veil, you will not be safe for unveiling. Because Enoch understands something your listeners need to understand. Revelation without formation becomes harm. When the vessel is not steady, light does not heal it, light inflames it. When the heart is not humble, knowledge does not stabilize it, it exalts it. When the household is not ordered, power does not bless it, power fractures it. And this is where Enoch's warning becomes even more direct. Some of you will go down, and you will tell yourselves it was harmless, and then you will return and persuade others, and soon the remnant will no longer be a remnant, not because it was attacked, but because it agreed, little by little, to loosen what kept it clear. He pauses, and he speaks the sentence that sounds like grief. Do not trade a consecrated life for a story you can tell. Then the company answers him again, not with cruelty, but with that familiar tone that excuses itself. We are only going to see. We are only going to understand. We are only going to learn. And Enoch answers like a father would answer a child reaching toward a flame. Some seeing is already joining. Some learning is already consent. If you want understanding, ask the Father. If you want wisdom, remain near the altar. If you want to grow in patience. The Father forms his sons and daughters through endurance, not through boundary breaking. And now Enoch says what he must say, because love is not silent. If you go down, you will not only be tested, you will be altered, and then you will need restoration you did not need before. I am pleading with you, do not create a wound you do not need. And the tragedy of this moment is not that the warning is unclear. The tragedy is that desire has already leaned. So many do not listen. And Enoch watches them descend. And the book wants you to feel this. Enoch does not look down at them with pride. He looks with sorrow because he knows what comes next. Now we move into the second part, the consequence layer, and let it unfold slowly and fully. At first, the descent feels like nothing. They go down, they breathe different air, they hear different voices, they laugh, they feel free, and they return upward saying, see, nothing happened. But something has happened. Their inner reverence has thinned. The veiled life begins to feel unnecessary. The Father's warnings begin to feel like an overreaction. And once the warning feels unnecessary, the boundary begins to fall. Then the descent becomes more frequent. Then it becomes relational. Then it becomes blending. Not instantly, but steadily. And this is the crucial consequence the ancient stream is reaching for. The remnant begins to lose its separateness, not through one dramatic rebellion, but through repeated contact that reshapes appetite. The people begin to desire what they once refused. They begin to admire what they once avoided. They begin to normalize what they once discerned as unsafe. And then, once normalization enters, discernment becomes harder. Because discernment is not only a gift, it is a muscle. And a muscle weakens when it is not used. So the people begin to say, this is not so dangerous, this is not so serious, we can carry both. But the heart cannot carry two directions without division. And division is how the enemy multiplies confusion without needing open warfare. Then the household order weakens. Not everyone becomes violent like Cain, but the subtle order that kept the heart clear begins to fade. Less prayer, less sobriety, less restraint, more appetite, more performance, more noise. And the result is what the pre-flood condition always looks like in every generation. A world with more knowledge and less wisdom, more connection and less reverence, more desire and less restraint, more speech and less truth. And in that environment, what is veiled is not safe to unveil. This is one reason the daughter theme is so important for us. The daughter, the seed of the woman, the wisdom line, is not unveiled into disorder. She is preserved until the household is safe. Because heaven does not unveil holiness into a structure that will misuse it. Heaven forms the structure first. So the descent thread is not merely a scandal. It is a warning about readiness. It shows why testing is mercy. It shows why patience produces maturity. It shows why restored household order is protection, not control. When the house is disordered, people begin to grasp for roles they were never given, claim identities they were never assigned, and seek spiritual visibility without spiritual formation. And then the enemy doesn't even need to attack them, they drift. This is why Enoch matters. Enoch becomes the witness of what the Father is building. A steady heart, a restrained appetite, a reverent life, a household that keeps the altar guarded, a people who can carry unveiling safely when the Father allows it. So as the world below grows louder, Enoch remains aligned, and the scripture line sits inside this moment with quiet authority. It says Enoch walked with God. That means he did not simply preach at others. He stayed in communion. He stayed under order. He stayed steady in a generation that wanted novelty more than holiness. And that is the layer that prepares us for what comes next. The widening of the corporate condition, the increase of blending, the escalation of drift, and the Father's preservation of a remnant even as the earth's direction becomes unstable, because the Father will not abandon the story. He will preserve what is consecrated. He will keep his promise alive. And he will continue to form a people, not for spectacle, but for safe unveiling. And so the company does not remain a single moment in history. It becomes a pattern. At first, they go down and return with confidence. They speak lightly of it. They soften the warnings with laughter. They make the boundary sound like an old fear, and they make dissent sound like a harmless experience. And the remnant hears them. This is one of the most dangerous consequences the book is trying to show. The dissent not only changes those who go down, it begins to re-educate those who stayed. Because repeated exposure affects the heart. It does not always corrupt quickly, but it normalizes. And once something is normalized, it becomes difficult to recognize it as a threat. So the company becomes a voice within the household. They begin to carry back new speech, new tastes, new entertainments, new ways of dressing a desire so it looks harmless. And those who stayed begin to feel pressure, not from violence, but from being called too strict, too cautious, too old-fashioned, too restrained. And the book's wisdom is this: when holiness is mocked, many people do not abandon holiness openly. They abandon it quietly by lowering the standard little by little so they can avoid being mocked. So the mountain begins to change, not instantly, but steadily. Prayer becomes less central. Worship becomes more routine than reverent. Offerings become habit without trembling. And the altar, though still present, becomes less guarded in the heart. And once the altar is less guarded, the inner life begins to change. Because the altar is not only a place of worship, it is the center of the household's government. When the altar is guarded, desires are governed. When the altar is neglected, desires begin to govern. Then the company becomes larger. Because once the first descent is accepted, the second is easier. And once the second is accepted, the third becomes normal. And then the descent becomes social. And then it becomes relational. And then it becomes blending. This is why the fathers warned and why Enoch pleaded. They were not only afraid of a moment, they were afraid of a direction becoming culture. And now the book brings to you to a sobering truth. A corporate choice creates a corporate atmosphere. And once an atmosphere becomes established, individuals inside it struggle to think clearly because the air itself is shaping them. So the people begin to live under a different sound, not the Father's steady tone, but the sound of the crowd, the sound of appetite, the sound of comparison, the sound of popularity, the sound of everyone is doing it so it must be fine. And this is the moment where Enoch becomes more than a warning voice. He becomes a witness. Because the Father always keeps a witness, not to shame the drifting, but to preserve a path for return. So Enoch remains aligned. And the scripture line sits here like a lamp in the cave, quiet but bright. It says Enoch walked with God, and that one sentence makes all the difference between the remnant and the company. Walking means steady steps. Walking means daily obedience. Walking means restraint that is practiced, not performed. Walking means you do not need to announce your identity, because your fruit announces your direction. So in a generation beginning to drift, Enoch's life itself becomes the Father's answer. You do not heal drift with louder opinions. You heal drift by remaining close enough to the Father that his tone stays clear inside you. And now, as the drift increases, Enoch's warning deepens. Because this is another layer believers must hear. The Father is patient, but he is not careless. He warns, he waits, he gives time. He sends voices at the threshold. But if the corporate condition keeps moving, consequence eventually meets the earth. Not because God enjoys judgment, but because unchecked disorder devours everything it touches. So Enoch's warning begins to sound like this. Do not confuse patience with permission. Do not confuse time with approval. Do not confuse God's restraint with God's agreement. And this is where the pre-flood atmosphere begins to form. The book is moving toward the condition Scripture will later describe in careful language. A world growing mixed, noisy, and unstable, where boundaries between consecrated life and worldly appetite blur more and more. And as we weave Scripture gently inside the teaching, we can say it this way. It says the heart of man can become continually bent toward disorder if no restraint remains. It says the earth can fill with violence when desire is no longer governed. And it says that when the sons of God saw the daughters of men, a boundary was crossed. We do not have to force every detail right now. We are simply recognizing the pattern the tradition is leaning toward. Corporate dissent leads to corporate mingling, and mingling leads to a world in which the holy line struggles to remain distinct. And now, beloved, this is where the daughter layer belongs naturally and safely. Because the daughter theme is not merely a beautiful revelation, it is a governmental wisdom. The daughter wisdom's seed cannot be unveiled into a household that is not ordered. Because when the household is disordered, people grasp at identities they were never given. They claim roles they were never entrusted with. They chase visibility without fruit. They confuse desire with calling. They confuse feeling chosen with being formed. And this is where your audience sees itself. Even today, many people still speak as if they are the center. Some want to be the bride in a way Scripture does not permit. Some want to be the Messiah in a way Scripture does not permit. Some want to skip formation and go straight into proclamation. But the Father's way is the same as it was then. He forms the vessel first. He restores household order first. He tests discernment first. He builds patience first. Then, when it is safe, he allows what is veiled to be unveiled. So the drift is not only ancient history, it is a mirror. And Enoch's witness is not only an ancient biography, it is a remedy. Because Enoch shows what it looks like to remain steady when the crowd is pulling. And then Scripture gives that quiet honor again. It says he was taken. That line is not written to make people chase spectacle. It is written to make people honor communion. It is the Father saying, I see the one who walks with me, even when others choose dissent. Now, the consequence layer continues. As the corporate atmosphere below grows stronger, the remnant above is pressured from within. And the old boundary, the do not go down adjuration, begins to be treated as unnecessary by some. This is how the company becomes more than a group. It becomes a culture of permission, a culture that says, why not? A culture that says, you can handle it. A culture that says, it is not that serious. A culture that says, you are still faithful even if you loosen everything. And permission is always the first brick of collapse. So Enoch's warning is not only about where they go, it is about what they permit. Because the heart becomes what it permits. If you permit resentment, it grows. If you permit comparison, it grows. If you permit lust, it grows. If you permit self-exaltation, it grows. If you permit identity confusion, it grows. So Enoch stands at the threshold pleading for the same thing the father pleaded to Cain. Rule over what crouches at the door. This is the same law, repeated. Now we are prepared for the next step in the story's flow. Enoch's continued witness as the world drifts. The expansion of the company pattern. And the way the tradition stream begins to lean toward a coming judgment boundary, while still preserving a remnant line that the Father keeps for restoration. Because the Father does not abandon the earth. He preserves what is consecrated. He keeps his promise alive, and he continues to form a people who can carry the unveiling safely when the time is appointed. So we end this continuation with 3 layers resting together. The company's descent becomes corporate culture. Enoch's warning becomes the Father's mercy at the threshold. And the veiled remnant becomes the protected vessel for what heaven will unveil when the household is safe. And we stay close to Enoch now, because the ancient stream is not only showing what the company did, it is showing what the Father preserved through one man's posture. Enoch does not become louder as the world becomes louder. He becomes clearer. This is one of the deepest layers. When corporate drift increases, many people think the solution is volume. More arguments, more speeches, more public conflict. But Enoch's life shows another way. He does not fight the crowd to win attention. He turns toward the Father to keep the inner life from being reshaped by the crowd. So the book portrays him standing as a boundary voice, again and again. Not once. Repeatedly. Because the company's drift is not one event. It is a wave. And waves return. They come back up the mountain with stories, with persuasion, with friendly laughter that makes restraint look unnecessary. They come back saying, "We are fine. Nothing happened. You worry too much." And Enoch answers with the same steady tone every time. "You're measuring danger by what you can see with your eyes, but the true change begins in what you can no longer feel in your conscience. The first loss is not your reputation. The first loss is your sensitivity." He speaks like someone guarding a lamp from the wind, because he knows a heart can lose reverence quietly. First, the prayer becomes short. Then it becomes occasional. Then it becomes dry. Then it becomes a memory. And the person still thinks they are fine because life looks normal. But inside, the altar remains uncovered. So Enoch keeps calling the remnant back to the covering, back to worship as alignment, back to restraint as mercy, back to concealment as protection. And he teaches them a holy rule that most people only learn through pain. Do not wait until desire becomes strong to resist it. Resist at the first invitation, because the door is easiest to shut when it is barely open. And now the Father's own tone in Scripture can be read as a continuation of that same wisdom. It says we must test the spirits. It says we must be sober and watchful. It says endurance produces maturity. Those are not abstract verses. They are the internal architecture of Enoch's life. So Enoch begins to separate, not in hatred, but in clarity. He does not separate from people as though he were superior. He separates from the pattern that is forming. Because this is another deep layer. If you mingle with a pattern long enough, you begin to call that pattern normal. And once normal changes, discernment becomes difficult. So Enoch guards normally. He guards what the fathers guarded: prayer, restraint, reverence, and household order. And his separation becomes a witness. It becomes a sign to the remnant that the Father's counsel still stands, even if the crowd laughs at it. Then Enoch's work deepens into intercession. He doesn't only warn the drifting, he carries them. He carries grief for them. He carries the burden for them. He carries the ache of knowing that many will not listen until consequences teach what counsel could have taught more gently. And this is what keeps his warning from becoming pride. He loves them. He is not saying, "Look at me." He is saying, "Please don't create a wound you do not need." And then the book allows us to see how a true prophetic voice behaves. Enoch does not bargain with the boundary. He does not negotiate the commandment down to something comfortable. He does not try to keep everyone happy. He keeps the Father's order intact because he knows that when the Father's order is diluted, the people become unsafe for unveiling. So he keeps speaking to the remnant. Guard your eyes. Guard your speech. Guard your bonds. Do not let your heart become double. Do not let the altar become routine. Keep the covering. And as the company grows, Enoch's life becomes more solitary, not only because he is rejected, but also because he refuses to be reshaped. And this is where the scripture line becomes luminous. It says Enoch walked with God. Walking means he did not live by impulse. Walking means he did not chase spectacle. Walking means he did not form his identity by public agreement. Walking means he stayed close enough to the Father that the Father's tone remained clear in him. And this is one of the deepest unveilings of all. The Father is not seeking people who can speak loudly about holiness. He is seeking people who can walk, because walking produces fruit. And fruit is what protects the household from deception. So Enoch's walk becomes the corrective sign in a drifting generation. The company is defined by permission. Enoch is defined by restraint. The company is defined by curiosity. Enoch is defined by reverence. The company is defined by a corporate agreement. Enoch is defined by communion. And then the scripture adds one more line that the ancient stream loves because it carries mystery without noise. It says he was not, for God took him. The point is not to produce an obsession with unusual events. The point is to honor the Father's recognition of a faithful walk. It is heaven saying, I see the one who kept the boundary. I see the one who guarded the altar in his heart. I see the one who refused dissent when the crowd leaned. And now, beloved, we bring this directly to you today with tenderness and clarity. Because many in our day want to be seen. They want spiritual visibility before spiritual formation. They want a role before they have restraint. They want to claim an identity before they have fruit. Some even begin to speak as if they are the center of the story, as if they are the bride in a way that abolishes order, or as if they are the Messiah in a way that dissolves reverence. And the Father's answer is Enoch, not a debate, a walk, a life that is tested and steady, a heart that remains under counsel, a soul that learns patience, a household that stays ordered, because the Father does not unveil what is veiled to satisfy curiosity. He unveils when it is safe, when maturity has been formed, when discernment has been trained, when the household can carry revelation without turning it into pride or confusion. So Enoch becomes our anchor. If you want to be aligned, walk with God. If you want discernment, guard the altar. If you want to be safe for unveiling, embrace concealment. If you want authority, choose restraint. If you want to resist the company's drift, do not trust the crowd more than you trust the Father's warning. And we end this portion with Enoch standing as the Father's mercy at the threshold, a warning voice repeated, a boundary preserved, a remnant instructed, a walk honored. And now we move naturally into what surrounds Enoch's witness, the widening corporate condition that the ancient stream points toward, and the atmosphere Scripture later describes with sobering clarity. Because once the company becomes a culture of permission, it stops being a private choice. It becomes the air people breathe. Initially, the descent was framed as an exploration, then it became normal, then it became desirable, and once it became desirable, it began to reshape what the people called wisdom. The Father's adjuration, do not go down, had functioned like a lamp in the cave. It kept the eyes clear. It kept the heart sober. It kept the remnant aligned. But when the company returns repeatedly with persuasive stories, the lamp begins to flicker in some hearts. Not because the Father stopped providing light, but because people began to prefer a different kind of light. The light of novelty, the light of approval, the light of appetite. And this is the quiet way the earth changes, not by one loud rebellion, by many small permissions that accumulate until the standard shifts. So the remnant line begins to be tested even more rigorously, not with open persecution, with blending, with familiarity, with relational bonds that feel harmless, with a softened boundary that is presented as maturity. And this is where Scripture's own language comes in with tenderness and seriousness, because it describes the same kind of shift. It states that a time came when humanity multiplied and boundaries that had been held began to be crossed. It describes a seeing that becomes desiring, and a desiring that becomes taking, and a taking that becomes a new condition on the earth. Notice the order: seeing, desiring, taking. That is the same strategy we've traced from Eden to Cain to the company. And the ancient stream wants you to understand, when a corporate atmosphere becomes permissive, the doorway that opens is not only physical mingling, it is spiritual mixing. The blending of what was consecrated with what was undisciplined until discernment becomes hard. This is why the Father formed concealment in the first place. Concealment is not only about protection from enemies, it is protection from premature exposure. Because exposure without maturity does not refine, it corrupts. So the company descent thread becomes a picture of premature exposure, hearts encountering patterns they are not prepared to withstand, and then calling the resulting craving freedom. And as the craving grows, the earth's atmosphere changes. The book's tradition stream uses different images, but the effect is the same as Scripture's description. The world becomes noisier, heavier, more unstable. Households lose order. Speech becomes more corrupt. Appetite becomes less restrained. And violence begins to increase, not always immediately as murder, but as a spirit that no longer keeps the other as sacred. And this is the deep layer behind the phrase, filled with violence. Violence is not only an act, it is a condition where love no longer governs, where restraint is mocked, where the weak are used, where the sacred is treated as common, where the heart stops trembling. And once the trembling is gone, the earth becomes unsafe for unveiling. This is the warning the whole story is carrying. Enoch's witness is the Father's answer to this atmosphere, a sign that a different way is still possible. But the corporate condition continues to widen, and the Father's patience remains because he does not judge as men judge, in sudden rage. He warns, he gives time, He sends witnesses. He calls for a return. He preserves a remnant. Yet patience does not mean the Father will allow the earth to devour itself forever. So Scripture speaks of a boundary. It says there came a point when the Father looked upon the earth, and the condition had become grievous. It states that the direction of the human heart has become increasingly bent toward disorder. It states the Father was grieved. Beloved, that line matters for us because it reveals something precious. The Father is not distant. He is not indifferent. He is not watching violence with a cold face. He is grieved. That means he still loves what he made. He remains committed to restoration. But love does not only comfort. Love also restrains what destroys. So the Father's grief becomes the ground for his intervention, not to erase humanity, but to preserve a path for humanity. This is where the remnant principle becomes clear. When the world becomes mixed and unstable, the Father preserves a vessel, a man, a household, a line. In Scripture, that line is Noah. And the ancient stream loves this continuity, from Adam's cave to Seth's remnant to Enoch's witness, to the preserving of a household when the earth's atmosphere becomes unsafe. Because the Father does not abandon the story. He narrows the vessel to preserve the promise. He keeps what is consecrated so it can carry the future. Here, the daughter's layer rests, with even more weight. Because the daughter, wisdom's seed, the consecrated inheritance, is not unveiled into a world that treats the sacred as common, wisdom is not thrown into the marketplace of appetite. Wisdom is guarded until the household can carry her without misusing her. This is why the veiled language matters. Not because heaven is playing games, because heaven is keeping the holy from being profaned. Because when the earth becomes unsafe, what is holy must be kept in concealment until a remnant is formed. So the widening pre-flood atmosphere becomes a prophetic mirror for now. When you see believers chasing novelty without restraint, when you see people exalting themselves without fruit, when you see communities trading reverence for entertainment, when you see identity claims rising without maturity, you're seeing the same direction the ancient stream warns about, and the Father's answer remains the same. He forms Enoch's heart, a heart that walks with him. He preserves Noah's households, households that obey when the crowd mocks. He keeps a remnant, not to be proud, but to be safe when unveiling. And this is why judgment, in the biblical sense, is not merely punishment. It is a rescue. It is the Father refusing to let the earth spiral until nothing is left but violence. It is the Father preserving the future for those who will be born later. So as we stand at this edge with Enoch's witness still glowing like a lamp, we understand the meaning of the threshold. The company's descent is not only ancient history. It is the pattern that produces an unsafe world. And Enoch's walk is not only a biography. It is the pattern that preserves a safe vessel. And as the corporate condition widens, the Father's faithfulness does not shrink. It becomes more precise. Because when an atmosphere becomes unsafe, heaven does not abandon the earth. Heaven preserves a vessel. The Father looks upon the earth and finds one household that is willing to remain under order. Not perfect in the sense of never being tested, but faithful in the sense of not bargaining with the boundary. And Scripture says, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. It says, Noah walked with God. That phrase is not accidental. It echoes Enoch. Because this is how the Father keeps continuity. He preserves the same posture across generations. He preserves a walk. He preserves a heart trained in restraint. He preserves a household that does not need the crowd's approval to obey. And then the Father gives Noah instruction, detailed, practical, anchored in obedience. And Noah builds, not because he understands every consequence, but because he trusts the Father's voice more than the world's noise. And this is another deep layer. The remnant is preserved through obedience that looks strange to the crowd. Because when the corporate condition is shifted, obedience always looks extreme. Holiness always looks too strict. Restraint always looks unnecessary. But Noah becomes proof that the Father's warnings are mercy. He becomes proof that the Father is not trying to destroy life, but to preserve life from what violence would eventually consume. So the Father narrows the vessel, not because his love is narrow, because his rescue must be effective. And through this narrowing, the promise is carried forward. The consecrated line is preserved. the future is protected. And after the waters, after the earth is quieted, the Father does not end his covenant. He renews it. He reestablishes order. He places boundaries again. He keeps the world from collapsing into endless vengeance. He continues the story because redemption is still his intention. And this is how the Father's faithfulness carries forward. Not by denying the seriousness of dissent, but by preserving a remnant through it, so that what is veiled can be unveiled at the appointed time, when the household is safe. Beloved family, in our next chapter we will follow what happens after preservation, because surviving a storm is not the same as becoming safe for unveiling. Next time, we will explore the re-establishment of covenant order after the flood, the restoration of boundaries, and how the ancient streams describe the struggle to keep the consecrated line clear even in a renewed world. And we will connect it directly to our central theme, why heaven guards what is veiled, why wisdom is not unveiled into disorder, and how discernment, patience, and restored household order prepare the way for what the Father intends to reveal. May the Lord cover you in peace, strengthen your discernment, and keep your heart steady in every season of concealment. We'll see you in the next chapter. Thank you for being here. If this teaching helped you, please like, comment, and share. It truly helps this message reach those who are seeking. To our new subscribers, welcome. And if you'd like to go deeper, we invite you to join as a member. The link is in the description and on our homepage. We are praying for you and standing with you in the light of Messiah, he, and Messiah, she. If you'd like to support the ministry, you can visit our store or bless our dear brother Michael through the Buy Me a Coffee link below. Thank you for your love and encouragement, and stay tuned for the next video. May the spirit of wisdom and peace rest upon you always.